The first control flow binding that we're going to talk about is the for each binding. The for each binding allows you to make repeatable sections for each entry in an array. So if you have 3 rows of data, this will cycle through each row for you and display the data. Here's an example. Here we have an unordered list that has a data bind saying for each of the products observable array. Within that, it has an li, and then it has 2 spans, which each span has a text binding. One is product cat and the other is product name. So what this is telling the code to do is that it will loop through and recreate li tags with the product cat and the product name for every product that it finds in the array. So looking at the script block below, we are applying a products observable array of 3 values. We have product name of cat, we have a product name of hat, and we have a product name of bat. So this will actually create 3 list objects because there are 3 list objects total in the products array. To see how this is done, let's look in Visual Studio and we'll code this up. Back in Visual Studio, let's go ahead and now open our control flow bindings view. So first thing we want to do is set up our script section. So section scripts. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to set up some HTML code for our for each binding, which is our first one out of the gate that we're going to do. So let's do div id equals for each dash binding. I'm going to do h3 tag for each. And then I'm going to do an order list like our example. Data bind equals for each products. So what this is saying now is that anything between the open and close UL tags is going to repeat for every product that comes back through this array. So let's create li tag. Next, let's type in some text. Product is, or at position, to span data bind equals text index. Now this index knockout variable that I'm using here first appeared in knockout 2.1, so you need to make sure you have a minimum of knockout 2.1 to be able to run this code. So close that span. Next we're going to do another span. Data bind equals text name. And put a space after that. And lastly, we're going to do anchor tag href equals hash symbol data bind this equals for a click. And here's parent. Again, knockout 2.1. You need remove product. So what this is going to do is that it is going to create list objects for every row that it finds in the array of products that comes back. And not only is it going to display that, but it's going to display a link at the end of it with the word remove. So it'll allow us to remove those objects right away. Okay, so, and after our closing of the unordered list, let's add a button. Data bind equals or click, add product, say add. All right, that is it for the HTML. So let's come down and create a script block. Type equals text JavaScript. So here we're going to go function for each view model. Go ahead and close that. Var self equals this. Self dot products equals ko.observable array. Go ahead and close that. Curly brace, name Coke, curly brace, name Pepsi, curly brace, name 7-Up, and curly brace. Okay, so that sets up our products array there. So next thing we're going to do is tell it what to do when we do an add product. So we're creating a function. Go ahead and close that function. And we're going to do self.products.push name new at new date. So what that will do is it is going to put basically a blank generic line item and add it to our list, just putting in the text new at and the current date and timestamp, just so you can see these getting added in real time. The last thing that we need to make is our remove product function. And we want to do self.products.remove. Save this. I don't need that one there. Okay, so last but not least, we need to do our ko.bindings apply bindings new for each new model. And then say for each binding, so we tell it where to go with our view model via jQuery. Close that, and just double check everything for this. Okay, save it, and back in our browser, we want to go to control flow bindings now. Control flow bindings. And here's our page. As you can see, the array gets loaded up at runtime, and it adds these links here to remove these items. So I can click remove, and it'll take one out. I can click add, and it'll add virtual objects, and as you can see, it's adding with these times. So now we're going to add code so that we can add to our product list. So self.products.push, parenthesis, curly brace, name, let's keep it simple, new product. Last thing we need to add is self.remove product to wire up our anchor tag up there. Another function. Close that function. And self.products.remove this. So when you click the anchor tag, it's going to obviously remove the product from the array that is passed. Lastly, we need to do our ko.apply bindings new for each model, and our jQuery call to target our div tag for each bindings. Save. Now let's go to Firefox. Since we haven't been on our control flow bindings page yet, type in control flow bindings, and hit enter. And here we go. Here's our observable array passing back Coke, Pepsi, and 7-Up that we had defined right here in our observable array. So let's hop back, and we see that's 0, 1, 2. We can click remove. It'll take out that. We click add. It's going to add a new product, new product. You see that they're still instantiating in there. We click remove, and that's how it works. The next control flow binding that we're going to look at is the if binding. The if binding allows you to use expressions to show or hide an element based on a true-false value, similar to the visible binding. Here's an example. We have an input type checkbox that has a data bind of checked for show message variable. And what that does is when you click the checkbox and it's checked, it will actually turn to true. If not, it's going to be false. Checked is a binding of knockout that basically turns checkboxes and radio buttons true and false. So below that, we have a div with a data bind for if binding, and it's tied to show message as well. So when show message changes from true to false and false to true, it's going to turn that div on and off. So let's look at Visual Studio and see how this is accomplished. Back in our control flow bindings view, let's go ahead and copy the previous section that we used for each, paste it, rename the ID to if binding, name the title if, and go ahead and delete all of the HTML code that's there, and go type UL, data bind, for each products, do an li, product b data bind equals text name, and we're going to do a div data bind. Here's our if binding. We're going to bind it to pricing. So within that, we're going to put cost, b element, data bind equals text, pricing dot list price. So what this is going to do is basically it's going to show the product name, and if there's pricing associated, it's going to show the list price. If not, it's not supposed to show the price. Let's go down to our code, our script block here, and set this up. Let's start a new script block. Script type equals text JavaScript script function if view model our self equals this self dot products equals ko dot observable array and we're just going to go ahead and use the same variables as up here. Oops. Copy those. Okay. And we'll just paste these in. Now we're going to do something slightly different here. We're going to add another property for pricing. We'll call that one null, so Coke doesn't have a pricing, probably because it's too expensive. And pricing for Pepsi, we'll say the list price is $25. And lastly, pricing for 7-Up, also to null. Pretty straightforward. So now we just need your ko.apply bindings to wire it to UI, new if view model, our jQuery get element by ID, so f dash binding 0 parentheses, quick check, everything looks good. So let's now save this, and we will look in the browser here. Bindings, refresh the page, and here's our if binding. So here we have product of Coke, which doesn't have a price, so it's not even trying to show the cost. Product of Pepsi, which does have a list price, so it is showing the div that has the cost in it. And here's our product 7-Up that does not have a cost associated with it. So let's go back to our model real quickly, and let's say, you know, we want 7-Up and Coke to have a price. So we'll say 7-Up costs $5, and we'll say Coke costs $100. Go ahead and save it. Go back to your browser, refresh the screen, and now you can see that the cost div is now shown with Coke for 100, Pepsi still 25, and the cost is 5 for 7-Up. The next control flow binding that we're going to look at is the if not binding. The if not binding is basically the reverse of the if binding. Here's an example. We have a div here that's data bound with the if not binding to an observable called myValue. And it's basically the equivalent of data bind if binding does not equal myValue. So let's look at the code in Visual Studio and see how this is accomplished. Here we are in Visual Studio. Go to cover the if not binding, which is the opposite of the if binding. So first things first, let's go ahead and copy our previous section of if binding. Go ahead and copy that and paste it, and we'll rename the ID to if not and name the title if not, and we will leave these the same except for on the product line, on the div line, we are going to change this to if not, where it says if. We're saying if not pricing dot list price is less than 50. So what that's saying is that if it's greater than 50, it's actually going to show. So let's look at our code here, and we will go ahead and copy our if view model script block and paste it, and let's rename it to if not view model, and down here we'll also name it if not view model. And things that we're going to do differently here, we'll give them new prices here. We'll make this 7-Up really expensive right now. And also our jQuery call to get the document element ID, we need if not binding, and it should be it. So let's go ahead and save and go back to our browser, hit refresh. So here we have the if not is showing that if not the pricing is less than 75, then or less than 50, show, otherwise don't show it. So it's it's the equivalent of saying if the price is greater than 50, show it. So it's kind of like a reverse of that. There are some cases you would use this a lot, but more than not, you would use the if binding more than the if not binding, and just use exclamation point to say the opposite of what you want for true or false. This control flow binding we're going to talk about is the with binding. The with binding creates a new binding context, so descendant elements are bound in the context of a specified object. Here's an example. Here we have a paragraph tag that's data bound to the text restaurant. But underneath it, we have another paragraph tag that's data bound with the with binding to the context of meal. So underneath that, we have a data bind of text for food and text and drink. If you look down the script block, you see how this takes place. You have restaurant, which is just a string, and that's tied to the text restaurant up top. And then you have meal, which encapsulates food and drink within it. So let's look at Visual Studio, and we'll see how to code this up. Back in Visual Studio, for the with binding, let's go ahead and copy our previous section. Copy and paste it, and we'll rename the title to with binding. and name the header tag here to width. And let's go ahead and delete the rest of the inner HTML here. And we're going to type in some HTML here. H4, we'll do data bind, text, do city, put a space there. And we're going to do a paragraph tag with the data bind equals width. And then we're going to do a span, data bind, text, name for the restaurant name, put space, then we'll do a comma, and then we're going to say type of restaurant it is, span, data bind equals text, our type. And close our span, close paragraph tag, and that's the HTML that we're going to do. So down here, let's start a new script block, make it easy to copy out later. Normally you wouldn't do this if you're building a web application. So function with view model, close our function, var self equals this, self.city equals San Francisco, self.restaurants equals name rodeo, our type for the restaurant type, Mexican food. That's right. And all we have to do now is do a ko.apply bindings, new with view model, and do our jQuery element with dash binding, 0 to get the element by ID. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're saying, back up in our HTML, with restaurants, which here's restaurants. So we're saying with restaurants, give me the name and the restaurant type, which is what we're doing in our HTML up here. So here's with restaurants, here's our name and our type of restaurant. So go ahead and save this, go back to your browser, hit refresh, and here's our width, and we're saying San Francisco is just our title, we type that in. A restaurant, El Rodeo, type, Mexican food. So let's look at Firebug quickly, see how this is bound. So there's our paragraph tag saying the with binding in the context of restaurants. And there's a restaurant, we're getting the name within the restaurant, El Rodeo, getting the type within restaurant, Mexican food. So that is the with binding example.